Good morning. It's good to see you all today. You all are loving each other so much, you just can't stop the conversations. That's awesome. We're so glad you're here today. If this is your first time with us, we want to welcome you, and we want to encourage you and thank you for joining us and invite you to engage with us as we look at Scripture. And my hope and my prayer is that today, all of us would take a step to know this God that we worship in a greater way, because He created us for an incredible purpose, one of which is to know Him so that He can radically change our life, because with Him, anything is possible. So I'm excited to start this new series. We're starting a new series today, How to Live Through a Bad Day. And somebody said, oh, that sounds just like a series I need. We all have bad days, right? We can all identify with traffic on the H1, with computer problems, with whatever it is, financial stress, school problems, study stress. We can all understand what it's like to have a bad day. And more than anyone, Jesus can identify with that. He has experienced bad days. In fact, one of the worst days in history, we call it Good Friday, but for Him, it was a really terrible day. It was a horrible day, a day of abuse, a day of betrayal, a day of mocking and humiliation. It was a really bad day. And we're going to be looking at this series in the next 3 weeks leading up to Easter. And then just 3 weeks from today, we'll gather together to celebrate what He endured on that really bad day for us. Because as we mentioned in worship, we all come to Jesus with needs, and really forgiveness is our greatest need. And that is what He provided on the cross for us. Forgiveness. He provided forgiveness. So I want to encourage you. You probably came in and saw these on your chair. Invite a friend to Easter. We're going to have egg hunt for the keiki. It's going to be a celebration. We're going to honor and worship God because of what He has done for us when He resurrected from the dead and provided forgiveness for us. So take these home. Take more. You can get more than one. We're not rationing them. Take them. Give them liberally. So today we're starting with our first part of our series, How to Live Through a Bad Day. And during this series, we're going to study at some statements that Jesus made on the cross, particularly statements that He made this final day, and really in particular 12 hours leading up to His death. Some statements that He made, and it's pretty amazing if you think about it. Jesus, it was enduring mockery, betrayal, pain, shame, suffering, and in the midst of all this, He's able to teach us some practical life lessons, multitasking at its best. So we're going to look at some of the things that Jesus said and did during His last day that will help us learn in a better way to engage and respond to the bad days that we have. Instead of just going, ugh, and being exasperated and dragging and complaining, we can look at it maybe with a little bit of a fresh perspective, maybe with a little more glimmer of hope, and definitely strength and encouragement when we consider what Jesus went through and endured on this last day. So maybe you guys are going through anybody going through a bad day today? Anybody have just kids couldn't find, for me, Sunday mornings, just getting to church was a miracle. Getting 2 socks on each foot of 5 children was a miracle. If I made it to church with everybody with socks and shoes on, it was a miracle. Sundays are the most stressful. Some of our biggest fights have happened on the way to church. I know it can be hard to get here. So maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe you had a bad week. Maybe you've had a bad month. Wherever you are, Jesus has words of encouragement for you. And we're going to start today by looking in Hebrews 12. And we'll start in verse 1 through 3. And we're going to look at 2 translations. This is from the NIV. It's not in your notes, but you can follow on the screens or in your Bibles. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us run with endurance the race marked out run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So the backdrop. The author's referring to the previous chapter, Hebrews 11. And in this chapter, he's referencing all of these people that had done incredible things for God. Many of us, we've heard it called the Hall of Faith, the Hall of Fame. If we were to give out like a baseball Hall of Fame, a football Hall of Fame, this is the Bible Hall of Fame. These were the people that had done great things for God. And the author is telling them that when you are running, remember these people. In whatever you encounter, in whatever hardships you endure, whatever challenges you face, remember these people and how they lived their life. And then he goes on to say, he tells them that you're going to have some really bad days. These are people that were living in an area in Rome, in the Roman area, that they were going to be persecuted for their faith. Some of them were going to give their lives for their faith. So he's like, it's going to be tough. You're going to have some really bad days. And it makes our bad days of computer problems and traffic and financial issues and friends maybe saying bad things about us on Instagram, makes those things kind of pale in comparison to what these people were facing. But he's saying in the midst of these bad days, remember this. And here's what he tells them. He says, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. Jesus is the example. Jesus is where we should fix our eyes. And I think sometimes when we have a problem or we have a challenge, I don't know about you, but that becomes my focus. I'm like, oh, that person really annoyed me. Or, oh, this traffic's really bad. Or, oh, this financial situation is really frustrating me. We tend to focus on the problems. And the author is saying, fix your eyes on Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Look to him. And we're going to look at what we're supposed to be fixing our eyes on in a little bit. But fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Jesus went before, he plowed through all the brush, all the debris, all of the hardship, everything to perfect your faith, our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. He says, for the joy set before him. Now that sounds kind of odd. The joy set before him. He endured the cross. Well, what was this joy? What was the joy that would carry him through this horrible day of pain and betrayal and mockery? What was this day? It was the joy set before him, was the knowing that he was doing the will of God, knowing that he was fulfilling what God had put him on earth to do, the joy of seeing you reconciled to God. You were a big part of the joy and the reason why he could endure, because he had his eyes fixed on what God had called him to do, and he was resolute, he was determined in finishing what he'd been called to do. So you were a big part of the joy that was set before him. Sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such hostility, opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So that, in the midst of all of our bad days, that should be our focus. We find our minds drifting, we got to focus them back to Jesus and what he endured on that day. Now let's look at another version, and this is the Message translation. This is actually a paraphrase. It's not a real translation. But he says this. He says, keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it. And that's the key thing that I want to camp out on today. Study how he did it. We're going to look at how he actually did it. How did he do it? What did he do? What did he say? How did he respond when these things came his way? These challenges, these hardships, these difficulties. How did he do it? Let's study that together today, because he never lost sight of where he was heading. That exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way. The cross, shame, whatever. And that's not a whatever, that's a whatever. Whatever God brought his way, he wasn't going to back away from it. He wasn't going to retreat. He was going to press in. He was going to engage in it because of you and me and what God had called him to do. And now he's there in the place of honor right alongside God. When you find yourself flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item, that long litany of hostility he plowed through. And that's what we're going to look at today. That will shoot adrenaline into your souls. So the author is talking about all Jesus endured. He's talking about the story of Easter. And that's what we're going to be looking at in these next 3 weeks leading up to Easter. Now, the backdrop, this week before Easter, Jesus enters Jerusalem with his disciples to celebrate the Passover. And there are people who love him and want to make him king. But then there's also this growing number of people that really don't like him and want to get rid of him. They see him as a problem. They see him as controversial. They see him getting a lot of the fame that they don't want him to get. So they want to get rid of him. So there's this tension growing, and it's real, and it's becoming more and more dangerous for Jesus to even be out in public because there's people that don't want him alive anymore. So it's in this week where we see this big celebration for the Jewish people when we see Jesus, one of Jesus' best friends betrays him, hands him over to be arrested. Jesus undergoes 3 different trials by 3 different groups of people, Roman, Jewish leaders, overnight, which, by the way, was illegal to do. Both by Roman and Jewish law, it was illegal to have a trial overnight. They're basically doing it undercover to get it dealt with so they could get it out of the way and move on with what they had been there to do, which was celebrate the Passover. He was convicted of a crime he didn't commit, sentenced to death that very same day, and then in the morning, after a night of beating, after a night of torture, after a night of mockery, they stripped him. They actually took his clothes off, had him carry his cross, put a crown of thorn on his head, nailed his hands to a cross, and as they were hoisting this big cross into the ground in front of all of these people, here's what Jesus said. In the midst of all of this brutality, all of this suffering, all of this pain, all of this mockery, all of this abuse, Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Amazing. Amazing that in the midst of his greatest pain and abuse and torture, that at that moment, he would respond by extending forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Amazing that he said it. Even more amazing, it was the first thing he said. It was the very first thing he said. And I'm going to suggest that it's the first thing we should do when we encounter a bad day. It's forgive the people that are trying to ruin our life. You need to forgive them. You need to get to a place where you can forgive the people that are trying to ruin your life. And I realize this is difficult. For some people, they're really good at it. They are really good at ruining our life. In fact, it's their spiritual gift. They've gone to the growth track. They went through step 3. They took the personality assessment. They did the spiritual gift profile, and it came back. Your suspicions were confirmed. They are uniquely gifted at ruining your life. There's something in that, some relational conflicts that they just don't, they're hard. They're hard. Jesus is teaching his followers that regardless of how hard and dark it gets, forgiveness is the path to me. Forgiveness is the path to me. In fact, it's so important that Jesus models this and includes this even in his daily prayer that he teaches his disciples. In Luke 11 and in Matthew 6, he says, you need to forgive those who've trespassed against you. Forgive those who've wronged you. You need to do it often and without hesitation. Every day, go through the process of releasing the hurt, releasing the pain, of taking that step and extending forgiveness. And I understand this isn't easy. For some of us, there's people that have really hurt us deeply, deeply, and it's affected us. For years, my son was mad at Pinocchio. And I know it sounds funny, but it's the fictional wooden puppet from the Disney movie, Pinocchio. And you might go, well, what on earth did Pinocchio do to cause so much pain in your child? We were at Disneyland when my son was 3, and Pinocchio, we went and stood in line and got the autograph and the picture, and Pinocchio saw my little boy there cuddled up with his blanket. Pinocchio took his blankie. Didn't steal it, just took it, kind of cuddled with it, and then gently returned it. He was admiring it, showing him how much he loved it. But to Brandon, Pinocchio broke the cardinal toddler rule: you don't ever touch a 3-year-old's blankie. And he was mad. And he was determined to hold on to his anger for 6 years. For 6 years, we had interventions in our family. We had bedtime discussions. Brandon, you want to watch Pinocchio? No, I don't like Pinocchio. Why don't you like Pinocchio? He took my blankie. He didn't mean to take your blankie. He was just showing you how much he loved his blankie. I don't like him, and I don't forgive him. This went on, and it was causing some serious problems. Brandon's here. He's here now. He's a good adult. So after 6 years, it does have a good ending. After 6 years, Brandon comes into the room one day and says, you know what? I think it's time to forgive Pinocchio. He was 9. And we were on a trip to Disney World. And he says, I'm going to do it. And he was, it was, and we make light of it, but we often do the same thing. It's the friend that says something mean about us, or it's the kid at school that, maybe says a bad comment to someone, or it's the boss that doesn't, treat you right. And we do the same thing. It may seem, we make some things that should maybe seem insignificant, a little bit bigger. So Brandon, this was a big deal for Brandon. He was like, I'm going to do this. And he was a little nervous about it. So we go into the park, and wouldn't you know, the first character right there at the gate was Pinocchio. Can you believe it? Out of thousands of people in Disneyland and thousands of kids and hundreds of Disney characters mulling around, Pinocchio is right there at the front entrance. So we stand in line, and we get our picture with Pinocchio, and Brandon explains to Pinocchio, I've been mad at you for 6 years. I'm really sorry. I'm going to let it go, and I want to be friends with you again. And Pinocchio's kind of like, huh? Sure, and plays along and takes the picture. But it was a big step for Brandon. We had to get to that place. And I think sometimes it's a big step for us. It's a real thing. People hurt us. How do you forgive the boss that mistreated you? How do you forgive the parent that left you? How do you forgive the husband that let you down? How do you forgive the friend that lied about you or gossiped about you? How do you get to that place where you can extend forgiveness like Jesus did? The Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. How do we get there? And we're going to look at that today. There's some things that Jesus experiences on that last day. I think, the story of Pinocchio just kind of taught us just how real that issue is, but also how hard it is. But I do think it's real for everyone. Everyone is going to experience betrayal. Everyone is going to experience that opportunity of being offended. In fact, Jesus explained it this way. He says, these are the times that we're living in. He says, many will turn away from the faith and betray and hate each other. Many. It doesn't say if it may not happen to you, but it's going to happen to some people. He says many. He says this is a reality of the world you're living in. So it's not a matter of if, but when and how you're going to respond. How are you going to respond? Because when we hold on to the hurt and the anger, it doesn't really, sometimes it doesn't even hurt the person that we're mad at. I mean, Pinocchio wasn't laying in bed at night going, man, that boy in California is really upset with me. He didn't even know he had hurt us. But we're the ones that suffer. We're the ones that it begins to eat away in our hearts. We're the ones that get the neck muscles tightened and the back pain and the clenching of the jaw, and we stomp around for days or maybe years, and we have the imaginary conversations in our head. Am I alone in this? We have the imaginary conversations in our head. We say, oh, I wish I'd said that. Or next time I'm going to say this. Or I secretly want them to fail. I don't want them to get that job. I don't want them to get that new car. Oh, I'm kind of glad that house deal fell through for them. Am I alone? Come on. Are you guys just like, oh, I don't want to admit it. I'm in church. We want that apology that may never come, and we wait for it, and we want it. And for a while, it may feel good. It may feel good to hold on to those things because we secretly are like, oh yeah, I've got power over them, but really we don't. Really, we're the ones that suffer. And the Proverbs describes it like this. It says, offended brother is harder to win back than a fortified city. And arguments separate friends like a gate with locked bars. Writer Anne Lamott says, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. When we hold on to it, it really doesn't hurt them as much as it hurts us. In fact, in Hebrews 2, it says that if you don't let go of this, it can become a bitter root that will defile you. It's poison in our souls. It doesn't do as much good for them, but it kills us. So how do we do it? Jesus shows us and models us. These last 24 hours, we see him going through some very real things. You may say, well, Jesus doesn't understand, but let's look at what Jesus went through just in those last 12 hours. Betrayal. Because if there was ever anyone had a right to not like people, Jesus does. He has a right to be mad at a lot of people. He has a right to not forgive. But Jesus, in his last 12 hours, betrayed by one of his disciples for 12 pieces of silver. In Luke 22, and we're going to be in Luke 22 through 24 in these for the next season of period of time. And Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. Some of you have been betrayed. Some of you have been hurt by someone you love deeply. In fact, I think when you love someone, it hurts more. Because betrayal, I think, just intimates that there's a relationship. So I think when we're betrayed, it hurts more. The more we love them, the more I think it hurts. False accusation. He was accused of crimes he didn't commit. In Luke 23, it says, I've examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he's done nothing to deserve death. Maybe some of you have been marginalized at work or overlooked, or maybe somebody said something about you that isn't true. Jesus knows what it's like to be wrongly and falsely accused. Rejection. Jesus was abandoned by all of his friends. When he was crucified, all of his followers deserted him. In Luke 23, it says, but with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified. And their shouts prevail. I think that's one of the more chilling scriptures. Their shouts prevailed. Matthew 26, it says, then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Some of you right now may be feeling rejected by friends, family members. Jesus knows what it's like to lose a friend. He knows what it's like to lose a close relationship. Abuse. He was beaten. He was mocked. The brutality of the crucifixion alone. Isaiah says that his face would be beyond recognition. That he would be so swollen, so beaten, that people wouldn't even recognize him. He was beaten and abused. In John 19, it says, then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. And they slapped him in the face. Some of you have endured the horrific abuse at the hands of other people. Maybe you were bullied. Maybe you were abused. Jesus knows how painful that is. Humiliation. He was stripped and publicly displayed. He wasn't just hung on a cross. He was hung naked on a cross. If that wasn't enough to just kill him, they had to shame him and humiliate him in the process. In Luke 23, when it came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, one on his left. And Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Jesus went through all of this. He understands. He understands there's nothing, there's no pain that you can bring him that he doesn't already know from personal experience. Some of you right now, you're feeling a significant wound. You're hurt. Someone betrayed you. Someone abused you. Someone took advantage of you. Someone gossiped about you or lied about you or cheated on you or didn't appreciate you. Some of you are holding grudges towards people that aren't even alive because of what they did to you. And some of you are mad. You're just so mad that you can't forgive yourself. And Jesus says, I know that pain. I know that suffering. And I'm here to help you walk through it. So how? How do we do that? How do we forgive when it's so painful? How do we forgive the people that have damaged our life, that have hurt us, that have ruined our hopes and our dreams? How do we do that? I think some of the challenges that we sometimes have a wrong perspective of what forgiveness is. I'm going to give you just a few things. They're not in your notes, but sometimes forgiveness is not minimizing the seriousness of the offense. It's not like, oh, whatever, it's okay, it's not that bad. No, Jesus says it is bad. It's a big deal. Forgiveness is not minimizing the seriousness of what's been done. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. Reconciliation is a two-player game. Forgiveness is a one-player game. Reconciliation requires the participation of the other person. Forgiveness does not. Now, my hope would be reconciliation for you, but that's not the requirement. I wouldn't make that the requirement for forgiveness, because then you are depending on that other person. You are making forgiveness a condition to how that other person will respond. And forgiveness is a one-person game. You have the control to choose to whether you will forgive or not forgive. So don't let that person and that relationship hold you hostage anymore. You can take the step to forgive. Forgiveness is not about doing what's fair. It's not about making fair. Trust me, you don't want fair. If fair was what we need, what we got, then we would be paying for our own sin. Jesus says forgiveness is not about fair. And finally, forgiveness is not impossible. I like that Jesus doesn't ask us of things. He doesn't empower us and give us the practical steps that we can do to make it happen. It's not impossible. It's possible. But how? How do we do this? How do we forgive? How do we take that step? How do we get on that path to at least take that step to start down the path of forgiveness, to where we can really say from the bottom of our heart with true honesty, Father, forgive them. First is we got to get close to God. I think the closer we get to God, the more we see just how much He's forgiven us. We see how holy He is. We see how good He is. And we see how much He's done for us on a daily basis, how much He overlooks our pride, our little things that we do, and the way that we treat people. The more we see how holy He is and how awesome He is, the more we see how undeserving we are. And as we draw close to God, we can begin to see how good He is and how worthy He is of asking that from us. So get close to God. Pray for those who hurt you. In Luke 6, it says, blessed those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. Now, when I've been hurt by someone, that's not my natural go-to move. I mean, I might say, oh, I'll pray for them. I'll pray that their toilet overflows. I'll pray that they keep their baby weight on. Or I'll pray that their computer crashes. I'll pray that they wake up with a big zit right on their nose right before that big meeting that they have. That's my natural, fleshly way of wanting to pray for people. But Jesus says, bless them. Bless them. Not just pray your manipulative little revenge prayer, but pray that God would bless them. Now that is not easy to do. That is not easy to do. So how do you do that? I think it comes back to that Hebrews 12, where we fix our eyes on Jesus. And when we fix our eyes on Jesus and we see what he went through, the brutality of what he endured for me, it enables me to be more liberal with my prayers of blessing. And as we begin, and we may not feel like it, but as we begin to do that, God eventually changes our heart towards those people. I can't explain it. Years ago, I had a friend. This was many years ago. I had a friend that hurt me, and it was painful. I felt like I was wrongly accused of something, and everything in me wanted to justify it and make it right and let her know. And it wasn't that it happened once. It just kept happening, and I got marginalized at work, and I got kind of labeled a certain way, and it was wrong, and it was painful. And as much as I wanted to forgive, it was hard. And I would take that step and go, oh yeah, I forgave her. And then something would happen, and Greg would say something, and then he would say, oh, you still have something in there towards that person, because my eyes would tear up. And he said, you still haven't gotten over that. So I began to pray. God, I pray that you would bless them. I pray that you would change my heart towards them and clean me and help me to forgive and let go and not hold on to this, because I don't want that bitterness in my heart, and I don't want to carry it into other relationships and interactions, because it's a poison and a cancer that begins to infect other people too. So I began to pray that. And then a few years later, she called me out of the blue. And I knew I had come to a place where I was able to go genuinely, with a clean heart, say, so good to hear from you. And I was able, it wasn't a long conversation. We're not best friends, but I feel like I was able in that time to see how much God had walked me through that process of forgiveness. It didn't happen overnight. It was a process. And it was me coming before God saying, I see what you've forgiven me. I see the greatness of what you've forgiven me from. And I pray that you would help me deal with this hurt in my heart so that I can genuinely forgive and walk with a clean heart, because you're worth it. It's like, and I've mentioned this before, it's like having a big piano on one side of the room and pushing it all the way over to the other side of the room, and then waking up the next morning and finding the piano back over there. And then you got to go, oh my gosh, I got to drag that piano all the way over the room again, and you drag the piano all the way across the room, and then the next morning it's back over there. And then you got to do that work day after day after day after day until the weight is lifted and you're free. And you know, because you don't have that hurt anymore. It's still the memory, and it still be like, yeah, it might still be tender, but you don't have that vengeful pain that you used to have. This was foreign in Jesus' day. This was foreign for these people. The Roman people, it was revenge. You hurt me, I hurt you back. Jewish law, too, was an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So he's speaking, you got to live differently. And he's telling Christ followers, you got to live differently. Because I forgave you, you should model forgiveness to others. And that's your third point. We forgive because Christ forgave us. Forgive as you've been forgiven. In Colossians 3:13, it says, forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. So that's without conditions. Jesus wasn't hanging on the cross and says, I forgive everybody but the people that are right here, right now. I forgive everybody but the person that spit on me just now. I forgive everybody but Judas who handed me over. He says, forgive without conditions, liberally, as I've forgiven you. And that's hard, but it's worth it. Because then the weight, we don't carry it around. Because really it doesn't hurt the other people as much as it really begins to hurt us and infect our relationships. So I don't know about you, but God's forgiven me a lot. Every day I'm becoming more and more aware of just the magnitude of my debt and the greatness of his forgiveness and provision through Jesus. And we may not have what it takes right now to forgive, but as we come before Jesus and get close to him and ask him to continue to reveal to us just how good he is in our life, how much he's done for us, we can take those steps to pray those prayers to bless those people that hurt us, to release them to God, and ask him to give us in our heart the ability to forgive and lift that weight, that burden that we're carrying. But at some point we have to make that choice. And it is a choice. We have to come to that place where we say those people that have wounded us, hurt us, wronged us, betrayed us, don't owe us anymore. They don't owe us. We're going to say the debt is canceled, that we're even. We're not going to hold it over them. We're not going to remind them of it. We're not going to nag. We're not going to withhold love or appreciation or just do the silent treatment. We're going to forgive. We're not going to say the debt's canceled. They don't owe us anything anymore. As long as it takes until the weight is lifted. So as we close today, the forgiven forgive. And I want to invite you to pray with me as we close. And I know some of you, this may be bringing up pictures of people in your mind, people that maybe wounds from your past, things that are difficult. But you may say, today is my day. I'm going to take a step. I'm going to take a step to forgive. I'm going to take a step to release this person to Jesus and get on that path of forgiving them as you've forgiven me. So let's pray.